guys, how are you doing? So in today's class, we are going to start with you and your story. Now, why are we starting here? I know this seems like one of those things where you talk about stories, you talk about you, and immediately people's defenses start going up. They're like, well, stories sound like a wishy-washy creative concept, and I'm not really sure how this fits in, or, well, I don't want this brand to be about me, I don't want my name on it, I don't want my face on it. That's not something I'm into. Well, I think that it's really important to start with you because you are at the heart of your business. You're at the heart of your brand. Now, I know people do fine selling widgets, selling random bits and pieces on Amazon, on eBay, and I know because I've done a lot of that too. But I think when you are really looking at doing something that's sustainable and something long-term, you have to have an interest in it. It has to be something that's close to your heart, that you have a genuine passion, a genuine interest for. Otherwise, you're going to get pretty miserable after a while. If you're doing it day in, day out, you might as well go and get a job and do some work for someone else because this is really about you. So you are at the heart of your brand, whether you choose to directly be. And for me, when I look at sort of how I got started with treasure hunting and with pretty much everything that I've done in the last few years, it really started with a simple story. And my story was really that I came to the US, didn't really know what I was doing, didn't have a plan, was totally broke, got divorced, everything sucked. And then I discovered eBay and Amazon, and that was successful, and it helped me change my life. And on the back of that story, I've moved to a place where I can teach other people, and I've been able to create new products like courses and things that don't have my name on, that don't have my picture and everything else and with Catherine on, things like Tangent that actually are standalone products. And I think the reason story is really important is because it defines why. It defines why you are doing what you do. There's a lot of ways to make money. Your why isn't, I want to make money. Because if you want to make money, then you can do anything from working at McDonald's to going and working in a bank. Your why is like you want to bring your husband home perhaps, or you want to stay at home with your children or homeschool them, or perhaps you really are passionate about motorbikes or flowers or sewing or whatever it is you really, really love. And you want to spread that to the world. You want to sell that to lots of people. You want to develop your ideas in that area and you want to share that with people. And I think by looking at your story, starting with you, your expertise, which hopefully you've taken a look at the expertise worksheet and you've worked some of your way through there. I think by really starting with you, your interests, your expertise, and your story, it gives you a really, really solid foundation to start thinking about your brand and where you want to go with your brand. And what is really cool is that in the next few days, we're also going to start talking about brand. So everything you're learning here about story, you can also apply to your brand and create your brand story. You can create stories for your products, like why you have created those products and how they can help people. And bigger than that, what I've got to tell you guys is that if you bought this course, one of the reasons you may have bought this course is because the start of the website started with Jane's story. And this is something that personally I was having a hard time explaining what I wanted to do with Cultivate. I had a hard time sort of putting it into words, finding a way to describe exactly what I wanted to achieve with Cultivate. So what I found really helpful was to take an example customer and say, okay, who are the people I work with every day? What are the kind of stories they tell me? And so Jane, to me, the story of the lady Jane who has her crystals and she gets stuck selling crystals and she's not really sure what to do because her website isn't working very well and trying to get SEO help hasn't really improved her sales and she finds herself stuck. Well, I found what was a really great way of explaining Cultivate was to explain how it changed her and what the outcome was of taking Cultivate. So after she'd taken the Cultivate class, she felt very comfortable talking about crystals, sharing them with people. She found ways to make her customers really, really excited by crystals. So they were literally lining up to buy them as soon as she releases new crystals that she gets from her suppliers, by putting them into kits, by creating a crystal therapy service, by going and talking to people at shows and trade shows, by sharing her crystals with the world. And it's all grounded in story. The chances are, if you bought this course, one of the things that drove you to buy it was story. Whether indirectly it's been my story way back in the beginning, or whether it was Jane's story on the website that kind of gave you that push and you went, oh, okay, that's cool. I understand what this is about. So stories are great for you because they help you understand what you're doing, what you want to do, where you want to go. And they're great for your customers because they make things clearer. So let's go quickly through this list of why your story is important. And I think Jane's story really kind of embodies some of these points. First of all, stories create empathy. We relate our own experiences to a well-told story. So if we recognize someone in a story and we like them and we feel that they're kind of like us, then we realize what is possible. We can relate to that person, we can relate to that experience, and more than that, it inspires us. We go, oh, okay, so if that person in the story could do this amazing thing, they could change their business, they could change their life, they could maybe get a boyfriend, or they could go traveling, or they could have some amazing epiphany, then maybe that could happen to us too. So stories are actually very, very inspiring. Also, stories are memorable. I know if you sort of think back on your childhood, you really remember all the stories you were told, whether it was sort of the Hare and the Tortoise or Bible stories like Noah's Ark. Like, we really remember these stories, and we remember them much more than if someone had said to you, slow and steady, just take it slow. Like, that kind of advice goes out the window. But when you think about the sort of the tortoise taking his time and just being steady and plodding along, that visual image, that kind of emotional picture makes everything much more memorable. So stories are a great way to communicate with your customers because they imprint a memory in their heads of you, of your product, of your service. Stories, and I'm kind of ahead of myself there because stories are more engaging than a how-to. So, I mean, as I say, people remember stories and they also listen up. When you start telling someone a story, like watch people in a bar. If some guy's just telling you something, or they're just telling their friends, you should do this, young man, you should do this. People just zone out. They don't want to hear that. But if they're telling a story, you can kind of see how people start paying attention when someone's sat at a table and is telling a story. The stories are engaging. You want to listen. You want to know what's the end? Where's this going? What's he going to do? Like, you get excited when you hear a story. And also the story, it really simplifies the complex. So if you're trying to explain to someone how to do something, often telling them a quick story can really bring that whole process down. And again, with Jane's story, I think that's hopefully what we achieved with that I really wanted to explain this whole big course, like how it can change your business, how it's going to show you new pathways, open up new doors for you. And I found that very hard to put into words, whereas a story made it very clear without having to use pages and pages and pages to explain exactly what process we were going to do and what it would do. And I think it was much more entertaining to do it that way. Another thing that's really important about your story is it shows the flaws and challenges you dealt with when you were overcoming something. And by looking at those challenges, that can be really, really helpful for you and also for your audience. By acknowledging challenges, that's when you have a good, engaging story. Like, think back about the guy in the bar and he's like, oh, I walked into a room and I fought 10 men single-handedly with my bare fists. You're like, okay, nice story, but you're not engaged with that. Whereas if you hear a story about sort of one woman and all the troubles that she dealt with and how she came out on top, you're going to be rooting for her by the end of it, because she actually had to deal with a lot of problems. She had to deal with a lot of issues to get where she was. So it's real. Like, your story has to be real and relatable. Another thing about why stories are important. Stories must be important because they are universal to every culture. Pretty much every culture you look at through history, every country has stories in some shape or form. And that's because stories are so important. They're so important because they're a way of communication. They're a way of explaining something. They're a way of communicating a problem. I mean, if you've been to the river to get water and there was a crocodile there, it's going to be much more effective to come back and tell that story and say, whoa, this crocodile jumped out and I was terrified. And if you go down there, be careful because he almost took my arm off. That's like way more exciting and interesting and memorable than just saying, oh, be careful when you go down to the water, there's a crocodile. Like, you need to hear the story to really connect with it and understand it and internalize it to a point that you actually work with it. Another great thing about stories is that they can really help you think through a whole process. So if you write a story about someone using your product, it can actually help you identify problems with your product or problems with the way you envision it being used. So for example, I don't know, maybe you have your target customer is an older person and you've created a non-slip mat that can go on the driveway to your house that they can walk along. And maybe as you write the story of how, like, this old gentleman called Keith goes and buys the mat and lays it out, it might make you aware of some of the problems as you think through his process. Because you go, oh, okay, hold on. If he's an older, sort of more infirm gentleman, where's he going to buy it from? Is it going to be difficult for him to go to, say, Home Depot? Maybe I need to make it available online. Or if you think through it, how's he going to put the mat down? Maybe if he is infirm, he might have a difficult time actually laying the mat. So that might make you change how you would package the mat. Maybe you're going to put it in like a roll that he can easily just roll out over his driveway when he walks on it. So by actually visualizing the customer, the older gentleman who wants to put this mat outside his house so he doesn't fall, by actually following his story through as he purchases the mat, lays it out and uses it, it actually makes you aware of problems, which is a great thing because problems are your opportunities to find solutions. Another thing super important about stories is that stories make you feel. And oh my gosh, I've cried my eyes out over things on Facebook just because they're a well-told story. So I think the last thing I saw on Facebook that really made me cry was an advert for the UK and for flying home to the UK for the holidays. And it had two teddy bears, and the teddy bears kind of looked like elderly people. They got glasses and hats and like woolly coats, and they're flying on a plane back to England. They get off the plane, they make their way through the airport. They're sort of old, so they're knocking things over accidentally, and people are helping them out and being kind to them. And at the end, you see them at the arrivals lounge, and you see little children running towards them, and suddenly they are like old people and their grandparents. They're like sweet old grandparents, and they're holding their arms out for the kids. And I was bawling my eyes out because of a few things. The advert made me very homesick, which was obviously kind of the intended effect. And I think that's really the thing about it. It was very relatable, and it creates emotion. And I think, and you see, I feel kind of like now thinking about that advert because it had such an emotional effect. And this is where stories are so important from a marketing perspective, because so much that customers do is rooted in emotion. It's rooted in feeling something, wanting something, just being driven towards something. And most of the time when you buy something, it's an emotional decision. Some things are logical, some things are sort of matter of fact, like you need kitchen paper or toilet paper or dog food. Those aren't necessarily emotional decisions. But at some point, like dog food may well be an emotional decision. You're like standing there like, oh, do I buy the cheap dog food or do I buy the really nice dog food because I love my dog so much? So stories very much about emotion, and emotion is what drives sales. And then the last point I have here on why is your story important is that stories are shareable. When you hear a really good story, you want to share it. You want to tell someone else that story. You want to tell it to all your friends. And that means that if your story is good, then you are creating more storytellers, because your customers will also go and tell people. Like I just told you the story of the teddy bears. I just shared a story that I saw on Facebook. And I also shared it literally on Facebook. So a good story will drive people to actually share it themselves, which is the viral effect, which is what you really, really want here, because word of mouth is probably one of the best types of advertising you can have. A testimonial from a trusted person, from a friend, super powerful. So hopefully you've looked through this list and you agree with me that stories are really, really critical to your marketing, to your product development, and to finding your brand and communicating with your customers. Okay, so if you're watching and you're going, oh no, I'm not a writer, this sounds like a lot of work, I don't want to get involved with stories, don't worry. We're going to talk about formula for actually finding and developing your story very quickly in a sort of paint by numbers way, in just a few slides. But I also want you to hear about this guy, Steve Denning. There's a couple of links about him at the bottom. You can see there's the YouTube link here, which is a video of him speaking. And there's also a link here to the Harvard Business Review, which is an article all about him. And it's a really quick, interesting read, and he's really interesting to listen to. So you might want to check those out. But basically what this guy did, he told a very simple story that went on to change the culture of the World Bank and make some global changes. And on the back of that, he's become a very, very successful speaker. He's considered an expert in the field of storytelling, and he's doing some really interesting things. So this is the story that he told that changed the World Bank. So he said there was a health worker in Zambia, the African country of Zambia, and they were facing a lot of problems with malaria. This health worker went online, they went to the CDC website, which is the Center for Disease Control in the US, and they just looked there on how to treat malaria, and the health worker found the answer he needed, took it back, and hopefully he managed to really start working towards treating people who had malaria in his country. Now, that sounds like kind of a lame story. And it's funny because if you read the Harvard Business Review, you'll see that Steve Denning actually went and talked to an expert on storytelling. And that's not a very good story. That's not a very impressive story. It doesn't go into any detail. It doesn't set the background. It doesn't tell you anything about the health worker or why they were searching for this or their long trek of trying to deal with malaria. It doesn't really tell you much at all. But this story was enough to convince people at the World Bank that they needed to start changing their culture. And the reason it did that was because he said, well, if this health worker could just go to the CDC website and look up how to treat malaria, why can't they go to the World Bank website and find out how to deal with the other big problem they're facing, which is poverty? And when you really think about this, he said, well, the World Bank knows a lot about poverty. That's something that we're experts in. We know all about poverty. Why aren't we putting this information out there in a place where it can actually help people, help the millions and millions of people who are dealing with poverty? Why don't those millions of people who are dealing with this problem have access to what we know? And when he explained the story, he compared the World Bank situation to this healthcare worker. They changed what they were doing. They wanted to put their information online. They wanted to start sharing their information. It completely changed how they handled communications, knowledge management, and international work. So this is a really kind of it shows the power of a story for leveraging change. And he shared a few really interesting tips in this YouTube video. He had 4 main tips, and I've outlined them here because I think they're really, really good. The first one is when you tell a story, it must be honest and complete Don't hide any important details because people can Google. And he actually calls this the Titanic story because he says, well, you could tell a story about the sinking of the Titanic and you could say, wow, on this day, 1,000 people were saved and they all came home in lifeboats. Yay! But obviously, people would find out that however many hundreds, thousands of people also sank with the Titanic as well. So not such a great story. Like, people can Google. So the first thing he says is make sure your stories are honest and complete. A second thing that I thought was really interesting was he talks about your brain function and brain chemistry. And he said that if you want to inspire people, you've got to give them a happy ending. If you give them a happy, positive ending, then their brain releases dopamine, which motivates people and encourages them to take action, to get moving, and to work towards goals, which I think is really, really interesting. Dopamine encourages goal-oriented behavior. So by telling people a story with a happy ending, and think here about your customers. If you tell your customers a story that has a happy ending, they're going to go, wow, great, okay, yeah, I want in on this. Where do I buy the product that will help me do this? This is especially good if you want people to maybe sign up for your subscription. Let's say you have a subscription box. You want to tell them a story about someone who got that subscription box, and maybe there was something in it like a ring, and they took that ring out and they gave it to their girlfriend, and their girlfriend was super happy, and they moved in together and everything was great. And people will go, wow, I want that subscription box. I want that happy ending because of the dopamine. So I thought that was really interesting. An inspiring story needs a happy ending. Also, an inspiring story needs change. So show a before and after. That is like one of, it's so funny about before and afters because they've been so used and so overused that Facebook actually have a rule that in adverts on Facebook, you can't do a before and after picture. The main reason for that is because a lot of people fake them. They're like, oh, this is me before I took this diet pill, and they're all big and they've just photoshopped someone else's head onto a body or something. But the thing here is that before and after stories work. And again, going back to Jane's story, that's kind of what we did there. We did, this is Jane, this is the problem she's having, this is how Cultivate changed her life. Now, you can also use other comparisons here as well. He suggests you can say, well, good companies do this thing, bad companies do this thing, successful companies do this, not so successful companies do that. And some of you who've been watching my courses for a long time may remember when we brought out our bundle course, we did an advert where Isaac was a character called Bundle Brian, and he was showing all the wrong ways to make bundles and sort of where a lot of other people go wrong with bundles. And I was kind of like the good cop. No, we're going to make good bundles. We're going to make bundles that people want to buy. And I think these kind of comparisons make for an amazing story. And it doesn't even need to be like a long, embellished, like complicated story. It can just be like, first of all, we did this, then we did this. Or these guys over here are doing this, we're doing this. Like, it's very, very easy to find that element of change or comparison. Lastly, and this is a really interesting one that it took me a little while to understand, but he says don't over-embellish the story. And this is where he talked about, he went to like this master storyteller, and that guy was very critical of his Zambia story, that he said, well, if you were writing it as a novel, like it would need all this backstory about Zambia. You'd want to tell them about sort of the heat and how people were living and all the terrible deaths from malaria. And you'd really want to sort of explain it all. And you want your health worker to have a personality, to have a backstory. You want all of these things in it. And he said, well, here's the problem. If I did that, then people would get too comfortable. They'd get absorbed in the story of Zambia, they'd think too much about the character, and they'd forget about their own situation. What he was trying to do was give them a parable that they would apply to their own situation. He wanted the World Bank, the people he was telling in the World Bank, he wanted them to be thinking about the World Bank. So they could understand the story quickly, they could see the meaning in the story, but they weren't lost in sort of like daydreams of Zambia. They were still in the World Bank thinking, oh, I get it. You've got to have knowledge online. You've got to have accessible knowledge. So that was the 4 points that Steve Denning made that I think are really, really interesting and definitely worth checking out. So I think what I really got from Steve Denning is that a story doesn't have to be complicated. It doesn't even have to be long. It can just be a couple of sentences to actually just show a change or to represent an idea. So I kind of like Steve Denning because I think he shows that a story doesn't need to be a lot of work. So let's move out a little bit, something that kind of sounds weird when you start looking at it at first, but it's actually become a really important concept in marketing, especially when you're marketing a service or you're marketing something like teaching or something with your name or your face on, which is the concept of yourself as a character and being yourself and authenticity and all of these ideas. So I just wanted to talk about these for a little bit because I think this is kind of an important place to start when you're looking at your story, when you're looking at who you are, when you're looking at what you want to bring to your business. So first of all, authenticity is something that is pushed really, really hard in business. In fact, there's a whole book called Authentic, and it's about building a business that's based on what you are, who you are, what you want to give to the world. And I think this can be quite a scary concept to understand. Like, am I being authentic? Oh no. Well, the first question is, we have many facets to our personality. You might be a parent, you might be someone's spouse, you might be someone's friend, you could be a drinking buddy, you're a professional. What is your authentic self? Like, if you go to Thanksgiving dinner with your mother-in-law, you're probably going to be quite polite and quite nice. If you're out drinking with your friends, maybe you're going to be a bit rowdy and rambunctious. If you're going into a meeting, you want to be assertive, you want to be forward, you want to be these certain things. It becomes very difficult to look at that and say, okay, well, I don't know, am I being authentic? And I think we become very caught up in like what is fake. If you're selling something, you want to present authenticity, which then creates this crazy psychological loop of like, okay, am I being authentic enough? Oh no, I'm trying too hard to be authentic, that I'm being fake. Oh no. And you can really tie yourself up in knots. Not that I've been there or gone through that process or anything like that, but yeah, I think that is a very common problem that a lot of people experience. So let's break that apart a little bit, because I think there's 2 elements to this. There's congruence and there's authenticity. Now, congruence is what a lot of people mistake for authenticity. And congruence is ensuring that your words match your actions. So, I mean, if I went into, say, my CreateSpace group and I said, hey, everyone, make sure you're super white hat with your books. Make sure that you don't sort of steal anyone else's content or steal anyone else's copyrighted words and put those in your book. But then I published a book that was full of stolen copyrighted material. That would be very incongruent. My actions would not be matching my words. So I think something that's very important for you as a marketer, as someone who is at the heart of a business, is trying to ensure that you have congruence, that you say the things that you practice what you preach. And I think most of us can sort of accept that that's probably a good thing in life in general, to try and make sure that your actions match the words. It certainly is easier to live that way. I think if you're trying to sort of say one thing but you're doing another, that's actually a very difficult thing to live with. And it's a very difficult thing to present to other people. And it's easy to get caught out as well. So try and be congruent is the first thing. Now, authenticity is a little bit different. Authenticity is about personal accountability. That's more about being accountable to yourself. Authenticity is living the life that you feel you are destined to live, that you believe in, that you want to live, that you feel represents you. So I don't know, maybe if you join the military, but really you've always just felt you're an artist, you want to be an artist, you love art, all the time your brain is thinking about art, you may not be very happy being in the military. Or vice versa. Maybe you're trying to be an artist, but really you want to be out running around in a field and being a tough guy. Like, you need to live the life. Well, you don't. You don't need to live the life that matches your belief system. But often you will be happier when you do that. So there's two separate parts to this. There's authenticity and congruence. And I think by looking at it in this way, it helps to demystify that feeling of, oh no, I have to be authentic. Oh, am I being authentic enough? Like, stop worrying about it. Don't worry about authenticity. Just ask yourself, am I being congruent here? Is what I'm saying matching what I'm doing? That's a really easy way to check whether you're being authentic in that way, whether you're being congruent. And then authenticity is really up to you. And it's kind of a measure of happiness more than any kind of moral judgment or any kind of ethical or moral thing. It's more about whether you are happy in your life. And I feel like the more authentic you are, the more you are living a life that matches your belief system, that matches your inner identity that you feel, I think the more you can translate that into business. So that might be something you want to look at and just sort of think about for yourself. Like, am I being authentic? Is there something that would make me happier in life? Is there something I feel more destined towards, or that I'm more passionate about, but I can't sort of live out that passion? I can't engage in that passion. That's when you might want to think about authenticity. So it's more about helping you than any kind of ethical concern. Now, there's a guy called Mark Snyder, and he put out a very interesting theory in the 80s about self-monitoring. And he said there are people who are high self-monitors and low self-monitors. And he suggested that high self-monitors are more successful in business. And this is a really interesting concept because it reframes the idea of authenticity in quite a different way. So high self-monitors are people who are very conscious of what everyone around them thinks of them. So they're people who are very concerned about their image, how they look, what they say, and who they say it to. They tend to do very well in marketing and sales, according to Mark Snyder. Now, he said that people who are low at self-monitoring, they tend to be people who say, no, I say what I think. Take me as you find me. And they tend to have less of a filter, and they'll just say what they want wherever they are, dress as they want, present themselves as they want. And they're very much focused on themselves, and they don't really filter what they're putting out into the world. And interestingly, he said that a lot of men tend to be better at self-monitoring. Men tend to monitor themselves more, look at what they're saying more, and look at how what they're saying is being received by other people. And he suggested that in his experience, women tend to self-monitor less. They're more concerned with speaking the truth, with saying what they believe in, with saying what they want to say, and less about what other people think. So I thought this was really interesting from a marketing perspective, because he felt that high self-monitors were more successful in marketing. So I'm not saying like either way is good or bad, and I think that's probably maybe a short-sighted way to look at it in terms of good or bad, but it's more a case of deciding what you want to put out to the world and what you don't want to put out to the world. So I'm going to skip ahead of myself here slightly and give an example, which is represent your best self on social media. And I think this is something I've kind of learnt over the years. I mean, I've been on Facebook since 10 years, like since it pretty much began in the UK. And I used to say whatever I thought. I really used to go on Facebook and just go, rah, 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 oh, I'm drinking in the pub, yay! Or whatever I wanted to say. Or, oh, I hate this guy on television. Like, I would just spout anything on Facebook. And I know that over the years, I've adapted what I put on Facebook. I try not to say, hey, I'm out drinking, I'm doing this. Oh, like, I try to be more thoughtful on Facebook. And there's a few reasons for that. First of all, because going back to part one, we have many facets to our personality. There's a lot more people on Facebook. There's people I might work with, there's my customers and clients, my students, there's my mother-in-law, there's my ex-mother-in-law. There's like all kinds of different people on Facebook that I have different relationships with. So I try to give that sort of universal to all representation of myself. I don't really want to go on Facebook and put out sort of negative or offensive things. And also from a practical point of view, I hate getting in political arguments. I don't want to get engaged in that because it's a huge waste of my time. And usually no one kind of comes out of those sort of things looking good. Everyone comes out just sort of angry and at each other. So I try to present myself positively on social media. I try and step away. And I get depressed, I get very down, and that is when I step away from Facebook. I don't want to put that on Facebook because it doesn't help me. It doesn't help anyone else. I don't think by doing that I'm being inauthentic. Because I'm happy to acknowledge it. I'm happy to say, yeah, I get down sometimes. I do get depressed. But I don't need to push that on you. I don't need to show that to you. Like, we don't have to show everyone all the nuts and bolts. We don't go and walk into a business meeting crying our eyes out. We don't go to sort of Thanksgiving and go on a political rant. Like, there's a time and a place. And so I think using social media wisely and presenting yourself well is about picking the right time and place. It's about presenting yourself professionally, reasonably, and authentically in the right time and place. So I thought it might be interesting to look at another perspective on this, which is the attractive character. Now, there's a guy called Russell Brunson who has the ClickFunnels e-commerce system. And I have some issues with Brunson and ClickFunnels and that whole system because I do feel that a lot of people who work towards that tend to present themselves in an almost fictional way because it really encourages you to think of yourself as a character. But I do agree with some of it. I think the concept of having a backstory, we just talked about that. I don't think it's about writing your story. You're not saying, okay, who am I? What did I do? Okay, Catherine was born in a sad alley in London town. Like, you don't make up your story. But I think identifying your story can really help you with your whys. As we talked about, it's why are you here? What do you offer? Why do you offer that? What can your customers get from you? Why do you want to help your customers? Identifying your story can really help you in many, many ways. And it can also help your customers identify with you and see, oh, okay, so she wasn't born super rich. She doesn't have all these amazing advantages in life. She doesn't have all of these things. So it makes you more relatable to your customers. And also people want to know you. They want to know what drives you. They want to know who you are. And I think having that backstory can be really important. Now, speaking in parables, again, I really think this is about communication. Like, if you speak in parables, it can give you a way to communicate with your customers and explain things very clearly. It can also be overdone. Like, you know, when people just sort of tell stories all the time and say, well, I was having a shower this morning and I had an epiphany as I stepped out and tied my shoelaces, and I realized we are all just shoelaces. And like you're like, what? Okay, all right, this is another of your crazy marketing stories. Okay, fine. I think it can have the opposite effect if you do it too much. So use stories where they're useful, where they're helpful, where they are going to help your customers understand your message better. That's when you use stories. Now, he also talks about flaws and polarity. And I think these are really interesting ones. Acknowledging your flaws can be really hard to do. But I think it can be done in a way that is honest and truthful and helps your customers understand things, or helps the people that you communicate with to understand things. And I think acknowledging your flaws can be a very honest thing to do. It can also be one of those things that sort of like, I'm too nice. I gave away all my money today. Oh no. Like, I think it has to be done in a way that is honest and authentic, and also in a way that isn't too much information. Like, I mean, I can say to you, okay, like I've dealt with things like being depressed. But what I don't want to do is have a sort of mental breakdown and say, oh no, everything's terrible. Like, that doesn't help anyone. It doesn't help you. It doesn't help your business. It doesn't help your products. So I think acknowledge your flaws. Absolutely. Acknowledge the challenges you've faced. But do it in a way, like, my feeling is do it in a way that is honest. And then polarity is a really interesting one. So this is the concept of polarity. The concept is that people who know what you do have three possible reactions to you. They'll either love you, they'll hate you, or they'll be indifferent to you. So the way this is presented is it's a pie chart split 3 ways. 30% of people love you, 30% hate, 30% indifferent. So those indifferent people are meaningless because they don't care. They're never going to buy anything from you. They don't care about you. So you might as well make them love or hate you. So the theory goes is that you don't want to make people indifferent. You want to make them love or hate you. So you do things that cause a strong reaction. And you'll see a lot of marketers doing stuff like this. Like they'll just randomly post a controversial opinion. So people have different approaches to establishing polarity. One of those things is that you might see certain marketers who say the F word a lot. Now that's very polarizing because a lot of people will love it and go, great, this guy talks how I talk, yay, or this guy says what he thinks, this guy doesn't pull any punches. Like that can be kind of something that makes people love them. But my problem with this is that I think the math that this concept is based on is false. Because what happens is that, and I think especially women, I think if you poll people, you'll find that women saying the F-bomb all the time actually turns off way more people than are okay or really excited by it. I think the majority of Americans kind of go when a woman says the F-bomb a lot. And I think with that in mind, like if you really want people to sort of like what you're doing and enjoy what you're doing, it's probably better to avoid being unnecessarily offensive. So I kind of have an issue with the idea of polarity because I think it's based on incorrect math. I think what actually happens is you start off, yes, 30% of people love, hate, indifferent to you. But what actually happens is if I made a bunch of videos when I went, all right, you just go out there and effing do this and effing do that, I think what would actually happen is that pie chart would probably end up with like maybe 30% of people love me, 60% of people hate me, or 70% of people hate me, which wouldn't be very good for my business. It wouldn't be very good for me. And honestly, by choosing to polarize yourself like that, I don't think it would be very congruent or authentic for me to do that either. So think carefully about doing things that are polarizing, especially now. We are in a very weird political climate right now. People are very touchy. And if you express an opinion on one subject, that tends to carry a lot of baggage. You assume that people who believe X also believe Y and Z. So it can be a shorthand to kind of choosing your audience. So use it very, very carefully if you are going to use polarity. And I'm looking at my slide here and it says acknowledge flaws carefully and with purpose. So my take on the attractive character, as I say, be very careful with polarity, acknowledge your flaws carefully and with purpose. Like, don't have a mental breakdown. Don't kind of freak out over your flaws and tell people how awful you are, or no one's going to want to buy from you. No one wants to buy from a reg. But be personable, be real, be human, be honest with this. And I think ultimately, my feeling is that if you're sincere, if you're honest, and if you're emotionally truthful, if you tell people what you're really genuinely feeling in a careful, thoughtful way, I think you'll naturally be an attractive character. I think people will be drawn to that. So it's more about self-monitoring, looking at how you're presenting yourself, and just, it's not about inauthenticity. It's not about incongruence. It's about thinking about how you would act if you went into an office, how you would act if you went into church, how you act when you go to your in-laws. You want to present your best self in that environment. And really, you're an interaction of yourself and your environment and your customers. So kind of think about it that way, and hopefully that makes it less complicated, the idea of authenticity, the idea of congruence. And I put down here, most importantly, care about people. Don't fake that. If you have a product, if you have a business that's based in a passion that you have, or a hobby or an interest that you have, then that's amazing. Share that with people and care about the people who also love that thing that you're into. So care about people that work with you and that follow you. So we're about to go deep now into how to actually write out your story. what I want to do before I do that, we're going to go through a step-by-step method for creating your story. But before I do that, I want to share some ideas with you that might help you to find your story. So the first place you can start is to brainstorm. Maybe get a big piece of paper and write down what has happened to you in life. Like all the big major events that you can think of in your life. What changes have you experienced? And this is an interesting one. It could be in all kinds of different areas of your life. And I've listed a bunch of them there. Health, like have you gained weight, lost weight? Did you ever get seriously ill or injured? Did you recover from that? What happened? What changes have affected you? Have you worked out or got super fit or climbed a mountain? Spiritual growth. Did you have any epiphanies? Did you change religion? Did you change your philosophy on life or your outlook? What caused that? What affected you to a state where you changed religion? Financial growth or change. Have you got poor? Have you got rich? Did you create a business? Like what has happened to you? Geographic location. Maybe you moved cities or towns or countries. Just house. Maybe you moved house when you were a kid and that really affected your life. Maybe it was something you learned, maybe a trip you took and you learned something on that trip, or it changed you, something happened on that trip. Maybe you learned to deal with an emotion or to cope with something that happened to you. You got therapy or you went through a process that helped you deal with that. Maybe you learned to thrive, you discovered self-reliance, or maybe you found the missing ingredient to something. All of these are things you could brainstorm on a big piece of paper and just write down all these things that have happened to you. And that's going to open the doors to so many stories that you've probably forgotten about, that you haven't thought, that you didn't even realize affected you so much in life. But this can be a really cool exercise to do, just to really explore yourself and find your story. I've also put a few writing prompts here. And this is something really cool I did. I went to a writing workshop with a lady called Pamela DeBar. And she's pretty interesting because she writes about her life as a groupie, dating all kinds of rock stars. And I went to a writing class with her. And what she did was she gave us writing prompts. And then she leaves the room and she gives you 12 minutes to write. And she says you can't take your hand off the pencil off the paper or your hands off the keyboard. You can't question what you're writing. You can't stop. You can't rewrite anything or delete it. You just got to write consistently. And don't think. You can't stop to think. You've just got to keep writing. Oh, and the last thing is you can't justify it. You can't apologize or say, oh, I didn't like that. Oh, I didn't mean to write that. You just write. You write without thinking. And I think this can be a great exercise because anyone can do it. And if you're saying, oh, I'm not a writer, I can't write, force yourself. Just say, I'm going to get a pencil or I'm going to get my computer. I'm going to open up Notepad. I'm not going to do anything else for the next 12 minutes. I'm going to set a timer on my phone or on my computer or whatever I'm going to do and set a timer and just write for 12 minutes. And these are some prompts that I've given you that could just help you get your brain in gear and just get writing. Because it can be really good to write. It's really cathartic to write. It feels good to write. And you'll feel super proud of yourself when you have a piece of paper with some writing on it. Even if you rip it up and throw it away and never look at it again. But it can be really helpful to just try and write. So I've given you some suggestions there, like it was over, that opened the door, the last penny in my pocket. Just take one of these prompts and write on it. And you can do it every day. Like it will really help your brain and your mindset to write a little bit each day. And also, it's a really powerful skill if you're going to be marketing. It can help you create blogs, ebooks, all kinds of things. So maybe try and do some writing. And also, here's a few tips on writing. Don't be afraid of humor and comic relief. If you feel your story's boring, maybe you can introduce a funny character, or you can think of something funny that happened in the story. Even if it's a terrible story, even if it's a depressing story, think about what was the funniest thing someone said, or was there like just an element of light relief? And most stories, even if they're serious and dramatic, like think about Star Wars. It has all these characters fighting a war, but then you have like C-3PO walking around, just and R2-D2 being like these funny robots. So use humor. Another thing that's really, really helpful when you're writing a story, use urgency. So a big improv thing we do is that we say, okay, we're going to do scene, an improv scene, and today is the day. And just thinking about that phrase, like today's the day that this happens, put people right into the middle of the action. Don't sort of have this long lead up and long backstory. If you're going to write something, go in the middle of the action. This is happening now. This is the big day. This is the wedding day. This is the birthday. This is the day that Dad punched the mailman in the face. Like, be urgent. Connect your story to trends and seasonal holidays. So this is an interesting one. If you can find a way, if you've written a story, look at how it relates to what's going on in the news. Look at what's going on with holidays. Does it relate to the current Christmas or Thanksgiving or whatever's going on at the moment? Can you connect your story to that? And think about Steve Denning and the World Bank. He took a story that was completely unrelated to World Bank about malaria and CDC, and he connected it to the people at World Bank. So by connecting your story to trends, you can have something really interesting to share with people, and it's a hook. That's a really big hook because it gives you keywords, it gives you hashtags, it gives you something you can put on social media that is relevant. Be surprising in a story. Don't be boring. If you feel like you're being boring, find a surprise. And lastly, your story has a beginning, a middle, and an end, and often a little tag on the end. And a tag can be a joke, it can be a moral, it can be something you learnt from it. So now we get to the fun part of this class, which is when we get to tell our story. And you are the hero of your story. So this is going to be all about you. And hopefully what you can do before you jump on this is that you can go back and do that brainstorming exercise where you take the big piece of paper, you write down all the changes, events that you can think of that have happened in your life. Hopefully you've done that, you can look at that, and you can pick something in there that is relevant to your product, to your business, something that has caused a change in your life that has driven you to where you are with your product. So for example, maybe if your product is something like the star showers, the Christmas decorations with the laser lights that are all over your house, if you've come up with something like that or you sell something like that, maybe your story is all about how maybe a kid laughed at your house because it was boring, or laughed at you for having, or maybe you were poor when you were a child and you didn't have any Christmas decorations in your house. So maybe you could draw on that story as something that's useful to your business, to your product, and to where you're going now. So pick a story, and this is the structure you can use to tell it. So what I have done, a guy called Patrick Campbell back in the 1940s wrote a book called The Hero with 1,000 Faces. And over the years, this has been adapted by many other writers to be versions of something called the hero's journey or the hero's story. And what it is basically a structure that all great stories follow in some shape or form. And lots of people have rewritten it in different ways, so there are different steps or different paths, but generally it's the same thing. The hero starts off in the ordinary world, he has a call to adventure, he's reluctant to get going on this call to adventure, but he overcomes his resistance, he embarks on the journey, he goes on some difficult trials, he makes his way through it all. He fights the big boss, he gets his reward, and he takes it back to all the people in his old village or his old town. And it's kind of amazing because a lot of movie script writers actually use this whole concept. From Star Wars to the Hunger Games, they all start off by showing your hero in their original environment, their big call to adventure, the moment they're picked or that they're told they have to go on this expedition. And they all go through this process, and then there's the big happy ending, and that's the story. So it's like a story seem like this big complicated thing, but when you break it down, it's actually just a formula. So what I would love for you to do is to use this structure and actually turn this into your story. So this is what you're going to do. First of all, what was your ordinary world? Before the story happened, before the change happened, how were you living? What was your housing situation like? What were your relationships like? Your finances, your health, any of those things. Take a look at those and see what was your ordinary world. Then what drove you to change? So like with my idea of the star showers, maybe you were poor and someone said your house is boring. Maybe that drove you to say, I never want to be poor again. I want to do something to make houses beautiful. So that could be your call to adventure. It could be someone laughing at you. It could be a sense of frustration. It could be someone's birthday coming up. It could be something awful like losing your house or losing a job. Suddenly you have to make a big change in your life. Now, a call to adventure is actually kind of a scary thing when it happens. And usually we face that with resistance. We're like, no, I don't want to change anything. I don't want to lose my house. I don't want to have to go on this big adventure. So use that. What was it that was holding you back? Is it fear? Is it a sense of duty? Is it that you feel you have an obligation? You can't sort of make a change because your family need you at home and you want to go on some big trip or something like that. What was the resistance and how do you overcome that? So in the original version of the story, it was usually meeting a mentor or getting some kind of spiritual sign. But I think it can also be learning some new knowledge. It could be meeting someone who tells you about a new product or a new method that will change your life or improve things for you. And then what happens when you go on the journey? How do you prepare for it? What direction did you go in? And how did you know? How did you know this is the right journey and that you're going in the right direction? And then the road of trials is like the really fun bit. Like, what challenges do you face on your way? Like, what kind of characters are there? Were there people who were difficult or made it difficult for you? Did anything happen that you didn't expect or account for? Like, okay, you're ready to go on this big trip of a lifetime that's going to teach you how to make the most beautiful decorated house, but then you're in a car crash the next day. Oh no, how do you deal with that? So what kept you going through that road of trials? What did you encounter and what kept you going? Then you get to the boss battle. What is the biggest challenge? What was the thing that felt like you wouldn't overcome it? Is there one big thing that just stopped you in your tracks? It could even be something like a person's opinion. It could be like your wife saying, no, I don't want this to happen, or your husband, or it could be so many things. It could be finally you paid for something big. Finally, you changed someone's mind. Finally, you had the money to do what you needed to do. What was the big battle and how did you fight it? And then you get your reward. So once you've beaten the boss, you get your reward. It might literally be money. It might be, okay, great. I sold people on this idea and I made this much money. It might be that you meet the girl of your dreams. It might be that you meet a famous mentor who changes your life. Like, there's so many things you could do here that are a reward. But what does it mean to you? What is the importance of that reward? Like, if you look at a lot of stories, it could be something like getting a medal. I mean, a medal is just a little piece of metal, but it means the world. So what does the reward mean? And can you share it? Can you take that reward back to your family, your friends, your customers, your students, your clients? Can you share that with them, the knowledge or whatever it is that you've gained? Who can you share that with? And then you can finish it up. How was it after you got that reward and you take the reward back home and you find freedom again? Did you slip up? Did you revert back to whatever it was that you were doing? Do you still have doubts? Is there anything that's still not been tied up yet and any loose ends? How have you been changed? How do you act now? And how do people feel about you now you've gone through those changes? And remember that it might not be for everyone. I mean, like, for example, if you're talking about addiction and beating addiction, then people will react very differently to that. Some people will love that you've got clean and been rehabilitated. Other people may have liked the old you. And that could be the same if you're talking about changing religion or starting a business. Some people will feel kind of threatened if you start a business. So go through these steps and figure out what those stages were in your story. So what you're going to do the brainstorming, write down all those ideas of all the changes and big events in your life, and then tell one of those stories. Pick one of those events and tell the story using the hero's journey. When you've done that, you have a story. You have found one of your stories. And if you're not happy with that story, do another one. Find out how to make them relevant to your products. The more you practice this, the more you do this, the more you will be able to tell your story, sell your products, sell what you're doing, and share it with people. So before I go and let you do your homework, I want to talk a little bit about imposter syndrome. And I really love what Seth Godin says about it. So imposter syndrome is something that really tends to strike all entrepreneurs, marketers, people who sell, people who work with people, trainers, teachers. And it's that sense of, who am I to be doing what I'm doing? Like, why hasn't anyone found me out yet? Like, even if you're in a regular job, a lot of people have this. They're like, it's all been a terrible mistake. Why was I chosen? I'm just waiting to be found out. And I think a lot of people really struggle with imposter syndrome. And I like what Seth Godin says about it, because he says, yeah, you're an imposter. If this was an actual meritocracy, then really you would be the only person who could rightfully inhabit that spot on the ladder. No one would. There's bound to be someone else out there who's better than you, or cleverer than you, or smarter than you, or who deserves it more. We're all imposters. So that's his opinion, which is just don't think about it. Don't worry about it. Drop the narrative of the imposter and just get on with your work and get on with your job. It takes a lot of time and energy to deal with imposter syndrome. Like, if you let it get to you, then you're wasting so much time, and it doesn't help. It doesn't help you. It doesn't help anyone that you work with. It doesn't help your customers. You're doing what you're doing. And if people don't like it, if they don't enjoy what you're doing, if they don't want to be part of it or buy your products, that's okay. They can go somewhere else. But it just doesn't help you to beat yourself up and to question yourself. It's like walking a tightrope. You just gotta keep looking ahead. If you look down and go, oh no, it's a long way down, then you mess with your head and you fall. So don't let imposter syndrome get to you. Just say, yeah, sure, I'm an imposter. That's what I'm doing. I'm not the best person for the job, but I'm doing the best I can. And I think that's the best advice I've ever read about imposter syndrome. So I wanted to share that with you, because what I want to do with this whole course, and as we go on, I want you to really have a positive mindset. And having a positive mindset isn't about magic or woo or anything like that. It's just saying, I want to make this happen for my business. I want to get on with this. I want to do the work. I want to give my best to my clients. And I believe I can make it happen. And the only way you're really, truly going to believe it is when you start doing it. So I want you to do the exercises in this course. I want you to work your way through the course. And I want you to believe, really genuinely believe you are moving in the right direction. Because I believe you are. Now, I have one more topic to talk to you about, very, very briefly. And that's the concept of archetypes. And we've talked a lot about characters, we've talked about story. And I think thinking in terms of archetypes can be a really eye-opening way and an eye-opening perspective on who you are, what you are doing, and how you fit into the story of yourself, your business, your brand, your products. And I want to give you just a couple of slides that I think might be fun to read through. I won't go in them in deep detail here, but I just want to share them with you because I think it might help your story writing. And I think on some level, I feel like this really helps you find a place in what you're doing and really think about your identity and your brand identity. So these archetypes are based on the work of Carl Jung, and he created 12 archetypes that basically describe human personalities. And I thought this particular chart from Ultra Creative was really interesting because he puts it on two axes: belonging versus independence. So that's people who want to belong, people who want to be part of the crowd, versus people who are independent, have their own ideas and are kind of moving away from the crowd. And that's the horizontal axis. And then the vertical is change versus stability. And I think it's really interesting to look at this in terms of leadership and business, to think about where are you? What is your business doing? And I think for some businesses, they are about stability and belonging. I think especially in healthcare, long-term care, things like that. You want someone who is stable. You want someone who has a sense of belonging to the community and supporting the community. Whereas if you're involved in startups, tech companies, progressive companies that are inventing things or trying out new things, you want people who are kind of more over this end, moving towards independence and change especially. So you might enjoy looking at these archetypes and where they fit into this matrix, and what you identify with and the characteristics that go with these. And I mean, it's funny because I look at sort of Isaac and myself and what we do, and I feel we're kind of over in this sort of change independence thing. Like, I think creating is very much sort of non-conforming, trying to build a better world. But you may look at this and think, well, I like just being a regular guy, the honest and dependable with a no-nonsense approach to life. Like, that's what I identify with. Whether that's what you want to base your brand on, I don't know. I think often the ones closest to the edges, like being the sage, seeking knowledge, even being a jester and sort of entertaining everyone, and being the hero for sure, sort of standing up to the bad guy, defending the underdog. These are great archetypes to think of in terms of your story, in terms of your brand, in terms of leading your community. So I'm giving you these here just to kind of look at, think about where you fit in and what these mean to you. And we'll probably revisit these as we talk about brand, because that's going to become a big factor in this course is as we establish brand. So hopefully these are interesting to you. I've also put these archetypes in for you here. They're the same archetypes, but just arranged in a different way, focusing on different things. So you can see the same archetypes around here with how they provide structure or yearn for the spiritual. So you can look at this in terms of, what am I about? Am I about freedom? Then I might be an explorer. Do I encourage people to look for freedom? And this is a great way to think about your brand, because, I mean, you might look at a popular company. Like, I think about sort of like Land Rover, and I feel like, yeah, they encourage people to go out there and seek freedom. Whereas I feel like a company like Adobe might encourage mastery, sort of like really be in charge of your graphics, like really produce the best graphics you can and master your skill. Other companies value service and having the best service that they can give. They provide structure, they provide great service, which makes them a caregiver. And I think particularly doctors and people in sort of medical care definitely fit in there. So this gives you just another way to sort of look at the identity of yourself, your brand, and how those all fit together. So I thought you might enjoy those. And this is the last little slide here, is the Myers-Briggs test. And because we've been thinking about you, your story, your character, I thought you might enjoy taking this test if you haven't already. And it's very quick. It takes about 10 minutes to take. And it's really, you know what I like about doing the 16 personalities test? It kind of almost feels like a relief in some ways when you take it, because you go, oh, all those weird things I do, it makes sense. I actually have this kind of personality and these drives and these goals. So I actually really enjoy this. I think it fits really well with imposter syndrome and overcoming imposter syndrome, because you take your personality test, you look at what it says about you, and it kind of validates what you do. It validates the way you react to things. It validates the way you act towards things. And I think it can just be a very reassuring test to take, and kind of a fun thing to do as well. So I do recommend trying that if you haven't. And that is it. So there is your homework. Your homework is to write out a story, just one story. Brainstorm some of the things that have happened to you in your life. Go back through the slides. You can go back, look at the slides, brainstorm what's happened to you in your life, and then take the hero's journey to figure out the steps of one of your stories and write it out. It doesn't have to be super long. It doesn't have to be complicated. It doesn't have to be really, really wordy, but just try and find one story and go through the steps to figure out what happened. And optionally, take the 16 personalities test, because I think you'll feel good about yourself if you do. So I hope you really enjoyed this class. I've had a lot of fun putting it together. Can't wait to see you tomorrow for the next one. And have fun and have a great day. Bye.